As they were faced with the strange yet powerful warriors guarding the entrance of the tunnel, Greg Fantilli, the Morris brothers, and Kevin all agreed to form a temporary alliance. They also agreed to choose 5 people from each of their contingents to lead the charge. While the others shrank back at the thought of being selected, all of the members of the Radiants were eager to volunteer. Kevin volunteered himself, drawing the admiration of all of the subordinates of the others. As Kevin led the charge, he unleashed the Blue Storm technique, shocking Greg Fantilli and the others. 2 powerful bursts of energy clashed against one another, and the power caused several people to slide backward several feet. Those who were slightly weaker lost their footing completely and fell to the ground. Even Kevin spun several times in the air. Finally, he landed on the ground. He held onto the ground with one hand to prevent himself from falling. His expression did not change much. It was as if the previous attack did not have any impact on his focus. On the warrior side, the one in the lead took a few steps back. Every time he took a step back, he would leave a deep dent in the ground, and the gray aura of death on its body weakened little by little. The warriors behind him retreated by nearly 20 feet, seemingly having suffered a serious injury. Calvin Morris was staring at Kevin from the side. Previously, a part of him hoped that Kevin would be killed here today. He didn't expect that not only was he not affected by battling the warriors, but he had also seemingly gained the upper hand so quickly. For Calvin Morris, it wasn't a good thing for Jake to have a good relationship with the level 7 expert. "What are you all waiting for? More than half of their spiritual energy has been consumed. They will need quite a bit of time to recuperate. If we wait for them to recover, it'll be a massacre. Now is the time." Kevin turned his head slightly and stared at the people from the other various major powers. Hearing this, the group of people finally reacted and rushed forward as fast as they could. No one wanted to die. Originally, these people who had been selected to lead the charge would have never had the chance to survive today. Fortunately, Kevin had appeared out of thin air, giving them a glimmer of hope to survive. Now that the opportunity was right in front of them, how could they not cherish it? Each and every one of them felt the adrenaline rushing through their veins as they took out their own weapons and charged at the warriors in front of them. Although the warriors were nearly perfect killing machines, they had consumed too much of their spiritual energy, so they didn't have much left to fight against them. In addition, the experts who had been selected to lead the charge had the advantage in numbers. Without any time to rest, Kevin once again threw himself into the battle. With a flash of cold light, one of the warriors was split in 2. "I didn't expect that there would be a level 7 expert hiding among the forces of the lower realm. Moreover, all the people from the Radiants who came this time were level 5 warriors. Even in Washington, D.C., they would still be considered a pretty strong force," Greg Fantilli said with a slight frown on his face. Calvin Morris snorted coldly and said disdainfully, "It's a pity that this Kenneth Wilkinson person is so arrogant. He doesn't know how to adapt to the situation. No matter how high his power base is, he won't be able to get too far without more vision. Otherwise, the Radiance obviously would have already risen much higher than it has." Greg Fantilli glanced at him indifferently and said with a sneer, "You can say that if you want, but in the real world, the difference in power base often determines quite a lot. Otherwise, why did you only argue with him instead of fighting him directly?" "What do you mean? Do you think that I'm afraid of him?" Calvin asked unhappily. "You should know better than anyone whether I think you are afraid or not," Greg Fantilli said. He didn't want to argue with Calvin. Instead, he just turned his head and looked at Kevin again. At that moment, Kevin was slashing left and right amidst the warriors. He was entangled with their leader while constantly dodging the attacks of others. "Something's not right," Jake Morris, who was watching the battle, suddenly spoke. "You felt it too?" Greg Fantilli said without turning his head. Without giving Jake any time to respond, Greg turned to the members of his family and said, "Everyone, get ready. After I give the order, everyone must rush into the tunnel as quickly as possible." Calvin looked at Greg in surprise, wondering why he had suddenly given the order. Immediately after that, Jake gave the same order to his people. Kevin also felt that something wasn't right in the midst of the battle. Although the others were getting more and more aggressive as they fought, 5 of the warriors had fallen, and each of them had been blasted into pieces. However, the battle was getting more and more difficult. It seemed as though the warriors weren't getting tired. In fact, if anything, they had become stronger. After repelling the leading warrior only slightly with a powerful strike to the chest, Kevin immediately felt that something was different. Compared to their previous exchange moments ago, the strength of his opponent had clearly increased. Suddenly, Kevin noticed what looked like a spinning whirlpool coming from the center of the warrior's chest. He noticed the same phenomenon on the bodies of the fallen warriors. Could it be that those who were still standing had been able to absorb the spiritual energy of those who have fallen? This thought popped up in Kevin's mind. "Listen up, everyone. Attack their chests with all of your strength. They're absorbing the spiritual energy of the ones who have already gone down," Kevin ordered everyone loudly. Everyone knew that if the power of 2 warriors like these were combined together, it wouldn't be as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. After receiving the order, everyone rushed towards the chests of the warriors closest to them. Although they had seemingly lost their consciousness and seemed to be nothing more than soulless killing machines, they instinctively protected their chests and unleashed even more powerful spiritual energy than before. The battle instantly reached a white-hot stage. "Everyone follow me," Greg Fantilli decisively ordered. Greg was the first to move. He stomped on the ground with his right foot and shot out like a cannonball. The rest of his people quickly reacted and started to follow him. Jake Morris and his men followed. Of course, Calvin Morris was not willing to fall behind, but he still maintained a small trick up his sleeve. He didn't think that there would only be a few powerful warriors guarding the entrance of the ancient ruins. The Water Guardian must have left some other mechanisms behind that had not been discovered. That was why Calvin was the last to move. He was more than willing to let the others lead the way so that if there was any danger that they encountered, it would fall on them. It would also buy him the time to retreat as quickly as possible if it came to that. The group moved very quickly. Although they were slowed a bit when they passed through the battle zone, they made it through mostly unscathed. After realizing the weakness of the warriors, the battle quickly turned in Kevin's favor. When the last of them were blasted into pieces, Kevin led everyone and quickly rejoined the main group. "Are you all right, sir?" Elijah Tanner and the others rushed over to him and asked nervously. "Don't worry, I'm fine," Kevin said as he waved his hand at them indifferently. Then he looked around. They seemed to be in a side tunnel with square stone slabs on the ground. The space above his head was very small, with only a few feet of headroom. The light in the tunnel was also very dim, coming only from the oil lamps placed on the walls. The weak flames emitted a dim, flickering light. The air was not circulating very thoroughly, and it was filled with a very thick smell of dust, as well as the faint smell of rotting corpses. However, the source of the rot was also very easy to find. Looking around, even in the dark environment, one could see that there were many pieces of clothing covered in dust, scattered all over the ground, and some of the torn fabric revealed skeletons underneath them. "It seems as though we are not the first group of people to come in here, but the seal at the entrance clearly had not been removed until now. How did these people get here?" Greg Fantilli said thoughtfully. He was afraid that no one could answer this question. "You guys go and check them carefully. See if you can find anything that can prove these people's identities," Kevin instructed Elijah Tanner and the others in a low voice. Elijah nodded his head and walked up to the bodies. In this kind of environment, there was a limit to the amount of available oxygen. It was impossible to light a fire to increase visibility. That would only use up the limited supply of air. Without the oxygen needed to breathe, even the most powerful expert would die here. After a brief search, Elijah suddenly found something that looked like some kind of token. "Sir, look at this," Elijah said as he quickly walked over to Kevin. The token was quite heavy. It looked like it was made from a special material. The pattern on it was very exquisite, and it did not seem to be affected by age. There was not even a trace of rust on it. Looking at the words on the token, Kevin's eyeballs almost popped out. It was clear that this token belonged to the Alliance. Kevin couldn't help but suck in a breath of air. Countless questions appeared in Kevin's mind. "These are actually people from the Alliance?" Greg Fantilli furrowed his brow and asked with a scowl. "Could it be that this ancient ruin has already been ransacked?" "I don't think so. Since so many people have died here, I bet that no one has gotten through successfully," Calvin Morris analyzed with confidence. Greg Fantilli raised his eyebrows slightly. He wasn't sure if this was good news or bad news. "Then let's continue," Greg Fantilli said with a trace of doubt, as he led the group and continued to walk in the front. However, everyone was very careful. They were afraid that any sudden mistake would trigger some kind of trap. Suddenly, Elijah Tanner pulled Kevin's sleeve and said in a low voice, "Mr. Williams, I just found something." After saying that, Elijah discreetly stuffed another token into Kevin's hand. When Kevin, the Morrises, Fantilli, and the others entered what appeared to be a side tunnel, they were immediately met with the smell of rotting corpses. Looking at the skeletons on the ground, they found a metal token and realized that they were members of the Alliance. They were unsure whether the ancient ruins had already been ransacked by this group, but they decided to continue nevertheless, despite the certain danger that awaited. As they began moving farther into the tunnel, Elijah Tanner carefully slipped a second token into Kevin's hand. The words on this second token made Kevin's breathing quicken. Based on the style of the two tokens, Kevin conjectured that at least two of the Alliance members who reported directly to the Alliance leader had died here in this tunnel at the hands of the Water Guardian. Could it be that Alliance has really already found this place? But if that's the case, then why did the news of it come from the Mavericks? Kevin thought to himself. Kevin kept thinking about this question. Suddenly, he thought of a possibility. The so-called ancient ruins were actually taken by the Alliance. Everything here was just a smokescreen. The Mavericks had fallen into a scheme that the Alliance had long planned. The moment this thought appeared in Kevin's mind, he broke out in a cold sweat. If this possibility was really correct, then wouldn't they be walking on the edge of death right now? The image of the Alliance leader appeared in his mind. Kevin seemed to have sensed something, but it was just a vague feeling. He couldn't tell what it was. He had a feeling that the Alliance wasn't as simple as it seemed on the surface. Perhaps there was a conspiracy hidden in the dark. Kevin thought of all kinds of possibilities, but he didn't have a lot of time. Soon they arrived at an opening and stopped. When they saw the scene in front of them, everyone could not help but reveal shocked expressions. They saw that the floor of the opening was covered with gold, and the walls were densely engraved with countless gemstones. The gems hanging above their heads were even bigger than a person's head, and they emitted a sparkling light. The refraction of the gems made the entire chamber light up. In addition, there were more than 10 sets of shelves on one of the walls, and there were many ancient antiques displayed on them. There were also many medicinal herbs placed on the shelves. "What the hell? Are the gemstones on the wall real? If they are, then we're about to be very rich," someone muttered. "Forget about the gemstones. Did you see those medicinal ingredients? How many high-grade medicinal pills can be refined with those? They're priceless," someone else replied. A group of people rushed forward at the same time. Some ran to the wall where the shelves were. They began to clamor to get the gemstones down and take them away. Others surrounded the medicinal herbs and their faces were filled with joy. In their opinion, all of this was what they deserved, especially those people who had stepped forward to battle the warriors at the entrance. They felt that this was the wealth that they had risked their lives for. However, Kevin felt that something was not right. He frowned and quickly swept his gaze across the room. Suddenly, he discovered a problem. Everything seemed to be arranged just right. "Stop! No one can touch anything here," Kevin reminded everyone in a loud and deep voice. As soon as he said this, some people immediately became unhappy, especially Calvin Morris. "What do you mean by that? Could it be that your Radiance wants to monopolize everything here?" Calvin Morris coldly harumphed and said. Before Kevin could say anything, someone immediately agreed with Calvin's objection. "Mr. Morris is right. I admit that it was definitely thanks to the Radiance that we made it here, but that is no reason for you to be able to keep all of this for yourself." Another person agreed, saying, "We can all take a step back and let the Radiance choose first, but you have to at least leave some for us." Kevin shook his head a few times as he looked at all of the people who were filled with righteous indignation. "I just told you to stop. It doesn't mean that I want to keep everything for myself. I just feel that things aren't as simple as they appear here. If we rashly start taking everything we see here, it might trigger some kind of mechanism." Kevin's tone didn't change as he spoke with a firm calmness. Calvin Morris crossed his arms in front of his chest and said, "What a grand statement. Do you really think that there's some kind of a trap here? Then why don't you go and find it? What are you trying to scare the rest of us for? You didn't waste all of your time and risk all of our lives to come down here to make a fortune and then just leave it, did you?" Jake Morris couldn't hold it in any longer. He stood up and defended Kevin, saying, "Hey, why don't you calm down? He makes a good point. Do you think that you're qualified to teach a level 7 expert how to do things? By that logic, do you think that you're qualified to teach me how to do things? I advise you to worry about yourself. Otherwise, I'll be happy to teach you a lesson when we get out of here." A cold light flashed across Calvin Morris's eyes. He really looked like he was willing to kill Jake Morris. After all, that would be the only way for him to ensure his place in his family in the future. Kevin's tone quickly became cold as he said, "I advise you to consider whether you would like to get out of here alive. If you say another word, do you believe that I won't let you stay here forever?" "What do you mean by that?" Calvin Morris demanded as he narrowed his eyes and glared at Kevin. Jake Morris's face also became serious. He looked at Kevin with surprise. As far as he knew, Kevin was the so-called Kenneth Wilkinson. No matter how strong his power base was, he was still just the leader of the Radiance, a little-known organization from the lower realm. How could he have the courage to confront the Morris family head-on? But from another perspective, if he really killed Calvin Morris here, wouldn't that prove that he was not as he appeared to be on the surface? Furthermore, if that did happen, Jake would be the only one left who could reasonably take control of his family. He would definitely become the patriarch of the Morris family in the future. What I mean is very clear. If you dare to challenge me again, Calvin Morris will never exist in this world again. Kevin's tone was very serious. "Do you really dare to touch me? So what if you have a lot of strength? It still doesn't mean you are in a position to challenge the power of the Morris family." Calvin Morris took a deep breath and said, "Don't make yourself sound so serious." A deep smile suddenly appeared on Jake Morris's face. Calvin's face changed dramatically when he heard that. Kevin also looked at Jake Morris without saying anything. Obviously, Jake said these words on purpose to anger Calvin Morris. He wanted to make Calvin attack first to make the counterattack justified. As expected, Calvin Morris's breathing had unknowingly become very rapid, and his aura was also fluctuating very wildly. Just as Calvin was about to lose control of himself and attack, A miserable cry came from not far away. "What's going on?" Greg Fantilli, who was near the shelves, suddenly said as he turned his head. Kevin and the others looked over and saw two people lying on the ground near one of the walls. Their bodies kept twitching uncontrollably and they were screaming. Everyone quickly surrounded them. In less than 10 seconds, these two people stopped twitching. Their faces were twisted to a terrifying degree, and black liquid began to flow out of their eyes, ears, and noses. What caught the attention of Kevin and the others more than anything was their right hands. They were completely scorched and were emitting a strong burnt smell, as if they had been scorched by intense flames. It seems like they were poisoned. Kevin looked up at the wall as he spoke. Suddenly, a few more people in the crowd fell to the ground. Like the previous two, their bodies twitched a few times before they died. However, these few people were even more terrifying. Black smoke rose from their bodies and their eyeballs seemed to melt into a pool of blood. "Damn it! These things are poisonous on the surface." Greg Fantilli had also reacted and realized the crux of the problem. Hearing this, everyone was shocked, and some people felt lucky that they hadn't been so greedy. Fortunately, before they had the chance to touch any of the things in front of them, they had heeded Kevin's reminder. For a moment, many of the remaining people looked at Kevin with gratitude. It was precisely because of his thoughtful words that they were able to escape disaster. "The ancient ruins really aren't as simple as they seem on the surface. Is there still anyone who says that the Radiance has ill intentions?" Jake Morris asked with a stern expression. This time, no one stood up to refute him. After all, those who died were the ones who had not taken Kevin's words seriously. At that time, Kevin suddenly twitched his nose. "That smell! Do you smell it?" After he said this, everyone sniffed a few times. Only then did they notice that there was a faint fragrance in the air that they did not recognize. Suddenly, something flashed in Kevin's mind. "This is not good. It's the smell of the knockout cocktail." Kevin had encountered the Alliance's famously poisonous knockout cocktail back when he was fighting to save Officer Emmett. Although it was not fatal, it had the same effect on all experts below level 7. It could paralyze the human body, and once a person was poisoned, no matter how strong one's power base was, they would be unable to fight off the cocktail's effects. "What the hell? Why is my head starting to feel so light?" "My hands and feet are so weak all of a sudden," someone else cried out. "Can anyone explain what's going on? I'm not going to die here, am I?" Someone else panicked. Soon, more and more people showed signs of being poisoned. They all fell to the ground as soon as they finished talking. Greg Fantilli, Jake Morris, and Calvin Morris reacted quickly. When they heard Kevin's words, they immediately held their breath and began circulating the spiritual energy in their bodies, trying to force the poison out. Kevin reminded everyone, the major characteristic of the poison is its compatibility. Once it enters the human body, it will quickly enter the bloodstream. The more you circulate your spiritual energy, the more you circulate it throughout your body. The faster your blood flow, the faster it will take effect. In a situation where there is no antidote, unless all the blood in your body is completely drained, the poison will only get deeper and deeper. "What the hell? This is so cruel," Jake Morris couldn't help but say. "Why do you still seem to be completely fine? Could it be that you were the one who poisoned everyone?" Calvin Morris accused as he forcefully supported his body with his hands so that he wouldn't completely fall to the ground. However, his condition was also deteriorating very quickly. His hands and feet became weaker and weaker, and even speaking seemed to be very difficult for him at this point. When these words came out, everyone's eyes fell on Kevin. Up until now, he was the only one who hadn't been affected. He was also the first one to discover that something was wrong, so he was indeed suspicious. "Are you stupid? If I was the one who poisoned you, why would I warn you? I would have just killed you a long time ago." Kevin snorted in disdain and said, "Then why are you still totally fine?" Calvin Morris asked. "After breaking through to level 7, I've become immune to heat and cold and all poisons. Didn't you know that?" Kevin retorted as he stared at Calvin Morris as if he was looking at an idiot. Almost at the same time, everyone looked at Kevin with envy. Of course, they also wanted to reach the stage where they were immune to all kinds of poison. "Since you are familiar with this poison, do you have any way to cure it? Right now, you're the only one who hasn't been poisoned. You have to help us." Greg Fantilli pleaded as he took a deep breath and tried to keep himself awake. "I also want to provide an antidote, but the one who is best at refining pills in the Radiance is Kevin Williams, not me. I'm afraid that only he can save you," Kevin explained. He then added, "But he gave me a few formulas that can cure some poisons. I also have some meds with me, but why should I save you?" What he said was true. He didn't need them, so why should he save these people? However, Greg Fantilli was a very smart person. He immediately understood what Kevin meant. "As long as you save me, feel free to ask me for anything. Whatever my family is capable of, I will not refuse," he pleaded. A smile appeared on Kevin's face under the mask. He had been waiting for those words. In the chamber, Kevin suddenly noticed a faint smell. Suddenly, the people who had touched any of the items in the room began showing clear signs of having been poisoned. Kevin recognized the effects of the Alliance's famous knockout cocktail, which he had encountered once before. It was enough to overpower anyone below a level 7 power base. As such, everyone else who was present was slowly succumbing to its effects. Greg Fantilli pleaded with Kevin to help them, promising to give him anything in his power if he saved them with a pill. Hearing this, Kevin smiled under his mask. Although he didn't know exactly what kind of strength the Fantilli family possessed, since they were able to ascend to the upper realm and seemed to be on par with Calvin and Jake Morris, Greg Fantilli was naturally someone that Kevin wanted to keep close. Therefore, he asked Greg Fantilli to make a verbal agreement with him. Of course, Kevin wasn't a fool. When Greg Fantilli said those words, he had already recorded his voice with his phone. "Mr. Fantilli, don't misunderstand me. I don't know if you will regret making such an arrangement in the future. To be safe, I recorded your voice just now. If you go back on your word in the future, I can assure you that I will make this recording public," Kevin said as he waved the phone in his hand. Kevin's threat had hit Greg Fantilli right where it hurt. People like Greg Fantilli were more interested in their reputation than anything else. Kevin turned his head and looked at the people around him. All of them were lying on the ground with their faces covered in dust. Their clothes had become tattered. They looked like a bunch of beggars, not like people of the upper realm. Kevin looked at the people of the Morris family. Due to his current identity as Kenneth Wilkinson, he took the initiative to speak to Jake Morris. "You don't need to say anything, even if it's because of Kevin. I won't ignore you, but you don't need me to tell you what you want to do, okay?" "Understood," Jake Morris replied in surprise. Then Kevin took out a small pill furnace and some herbs. He didn't even say a word to Calvin Morris. This kind of disregard was the greatest insult to someone like Calvin Morris. It was one thing to lose respect, but the most important thing for him at the moment was that this was a matter of life and death. Hey, you aren't even going to ask me what I can offer?" Calvin Morris whined. "Why should I ask you?" Kevin's hand, which was holding some medicinal herbs, suddenly paused as he asked in confusion. You don't plan to save me?" Calvin Morris said, his eyes nearly popping out. "You are really funny. Why should I save you? Do you owe me money or something?" Kevin replied sarcastically. Calvin Morris could not find any words to refute him. He was speechless. Then, while gnashing his teeth in anger, he finally muttered, "As long as you are willing to save me, just tell me what you need. I'll do it." In order to survive, he had already forgotten about the conflict between him and Kevin just a moment ago. However, he did not want to appear weak on the surface. I'm sorry. I don't need you to do anything for me. Kevin snorted coldly and continued to fiddle with the herbs in his hands. This was not the first time he had come into contact with the knockout cocktail, but it was the first time he had refined an antidote related to it. According to the records in the secret book, the poisoned antidote was not particularly difficult to refine. Hey, don't be too arrogant. I am a member of the Morris family after all. You had better not forget that. If you had the ability to save me but didn't, you would have let me die right in front of you. Do you think the Morris family will forget that? Calvin Morris said. He was clearly getting anxious. He desperately wanted to live, and it was becoming clear that he would do anything it took. If he couldn't remove the poison in his body soon, he would lose all ability to move. He would only be able to wait for a slow but certain death. Actually, I think that if you die here, no one will say that it was because I didn't save you. It was you, Calvin Morris, who was too arrogant. You risked your life and fell into the trap of the ancient ruins. Therefore, what caused your death has nothing to do with me or anyone from the Radiants, Kevin said. The others also seemed to agree with Kevin. If Calvin Morris really died here today, the Morris family would definitely take all the blame for this. Instead of risking getting into trouble, it would be better to push the blame onto the dead. No, you can't do this, Calvin Morris cried out in desperation. He had been famous for his entire life. How could he die like this? At that moment, Kevin suddenly put down the herbs in his hands and slowly walked over to Calvin Morris. He looked down at him and asked seriously, "Do you really not want to die?" "No, please. You have to save me. I'll do anything," Calvin pleaded. He was not willing to give up. "All right, I can save you. I don't need you to do anything for me." Kevin took out a white pill as he spoke. "Open your mouth and consume this pill." What is this?" Calvin Morris asked, puzzled. "This pill will temporarily negate the effects of the poison. However, if a person who consumes it does not get the antidote after a month, their body will rot from the inside out. Their intestines will decay at a visible speed and they will die a gruesome and painful death." Kevin's thumb and index finger turned the pill and he said, "As a gentle reminder, the higher the power base of the poisoned person, the deeper the pain will be." You want to control me?" Calvin Morris asked as his pupil suddenly shrank. Kevin's actions were clear. It was too obvious that he wanted to take advantage of the situation. "Give me the medicine and let me take it for him," one of Calvin Morris's men interrupted. Who are you? You think you're worthy to take this pill?" Kevin glanced at the man and then continued to look at Calvin Morris. He said, "Don't worry, I'm not interested in you. I just heard that you had some conflicts with Kevin. That's even better. The antidote is in his hands. If you want to live, consume the pill and then ask Kevin for the antidote. As for whether he will let you do anything else, I suppose that will depend on his mood." Calvin Morris stared at the pill in Kevin's hand and thought it over quickly. About 10 seconds later, Calvin obediently opened his mouth and let Kevin put it on his tongue. Could it really be that no one except Kevin could cure him now? There were also many high-grade herbalists in the Morris family, and if that wasn't enough, he could still seek help from the experts of the Herbalist Society. He determined that it was worth the risk. After all, what other option did he have besides certain death? Take care of yourself. In the future, it's best if you keep your tail between your legs. After Kevin reprimanded him, he turned around and returned to the pill furnace, starting to refine the other pills. Soon, a large batch of antidotes were concocted. The first ones to enjoy the treatment of detoxification were naturally the people from the Radiants. Calvin Morris was the last one to stand up. When he stood up, his eyes looked as if he was going to eat Kevin alive. "Don't touch any of the things here. Let's go take a look. If there really isn't anything truly valuable here, it's better to just leave." Kevin suggested as he put away the pill furnace. This time, no one opposed his suggestion. They obediently left the area where the treasures were. Jake Morris suddenly pulled Kevin's sleeve and said in a low voice, "I will never forget what you said about saving my life. There is something I think I need to remind you about. Calvin has always been a person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. You have made him suffer such a huge loss just now. He will definitely find an opportunity to take his revenge. I hope you will be extra careful, sir." "It doesn't matter. I can handle it," Kevin said confidently. While the two of them were talking, they entered what appeared to be the main hall of the ancient ruins. There was no decoration in the large space, only a coffin in the middle. "It seems like this place should represent the end of the Water Guardian's ancient ruins." Greg Fantilli patted the dust off his body and said while staring at the coffin. "Since you're already here, why don't you open the coffin and take a look?" Calvin Morris said. A hint of greed emerged in his eyes. This was the coffin of an ancient, mighty figure. There must be something inside the coffin that was very important to him when he was still alive. Kevin's eye swept across the surroundings and finally stopped on the coffin. He didn't know why, but he had a bad feeling deep in his heart. Since this was the end of the ruins, why was there only this one coffin here? If the higher-ups of the Alliance had met their end here, then surely there would be all kinds of dangers at the end of the road. For a moment, all kinds of difficult questions popped up in Kevin's mind, but he couldn't grasp the most important point. "Who is willing to go and take the lead?" Greg Fantilli crossed his arms in front of his chest and asked. "Since it is the end of the ruins, the person who takes the lead must be brave and resourceful," Calvin Morris said as he looked at Kevin. "I think the Chancellor of the Radiance should take the lead." "Why would he do that? If you want to find out what else is here so badly, why don't you go by yourselves?" Elijah Tanner couldn't help but stand up and retort. "Chancellor, you'd better keep your dog on its leash. If it dares to bark again, be careful. I will pull out all of its teeth," Calvin Morris said fiercely. Kevin patted Elijah Tanner's shoulder, signaling for him not to continue arguing. Taking a deep breath, he looked at the coffin in the middle of the space. Suddenly, the corner of Kevin's mouth curved up. "The people of the Radiance won't touch anything here. The three of you please act according to your own abilities." Then Kevin added, "But I'm warning you kindly. This place looks very ordinary on the surface, but I keep feeling that something is not right. I advise you not to touch that coffin." "Cowardly rat. The best thing is right in front of you. How can you back off now?" Calvin Morris said under his breath with a cold snort. "Then you should go ahead and help yourself," Jake Morris said. He would never let go of any opportunity to scold Calvin. "Enough!" Greg Fantilli frowned slightly and scolded. "You two have been arguing all the way here. Haven't you had enough? If you want to fight, go back to your family and fight." Only then did the two of them stop bickering. Almost at the same time, they turned their heads in the opposite direction. "The three of us will go and take a look." Greg Fantilli did not even ask for the opinions of the others before he made a decision on their behalf. Calvin Morris opened his mouth. He originally wanted to say something, but he was tactful and did not say it out loud. With a whoosh, Greg Fantilli took out his sword from behind his back. He gave the others a look, then walked toward the coffin. Jake Morris and the others quickly followed. To put it bluntly, they didn't want all of the most valuable things to fall into the hands of the Fantilli family, and if they did, another war would erupt right then and there. After Calvin Morris pleaded with Kevin for an antidote, Kevin finally produced a white pill that he said would negate the effects of the poison. However, he cautioned that it would only last a month and that at that point, he would begin to suffer a very painful death. As such, he would need to seek the antidote from Kevin Williams. Once Calvin and the others recovered, they continued moving and soon arrived at what appeared to be the end of the ancient ruins, where there was a coffin in the middle of a large space. Kevin urged the three of them to examine the coffin while he stayed back. Maybe it was because the light wasn't very bright, but it wasn't until they came right up to the coffin that they found that its exterior was many times more beautiful than they had anticipated. None of them could tell what material the pitch-black coffin was made of. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary coffin, but in reality, there was a strange layer of liquid on its surface, making it impossible to see the material clearly. In addition, underneath the liquid of the coffin, something seemed to be moving back and forth. A cold aura was also continuously emitted from the inside of the coffin. What is this thing? Calvin Morris couldn't help but ask. Who cares what it is? Let's open it and see, Jake Morris said. After all, it was rare that Jake Morris did not refute Calvin Morris. With that, Greg Fantilli lifted his sword and inserted it into the edge of the coffin. He then walked around it and drew a line all the way around it. Who will open the lid? Greg took back his sword and asked. He felt that he deserved to be able to stand back while one of the others did it. He was the one who had cut open the surface of the coffin. Since he had already taken the first step, he would naturally leave the rest to the others. The others just looked at each other. In the end, it was a pair of their subordinates who stepped forward. A deep red light emitted from their bodies and a dense amount of spiritual energy wrapped around their hands. At the same time, they gently placed their hands on the coffin and pushed it ever so slightly upward. Kevin suddenly frowned. Judging from the spiritual energy fluctuations coming from their bodies, their power bases were certainly not low yet with their push. The surface of the coffin did not move. At first, everyone thought that they just didn't use enough strength. But suddenly, the expressions on the faces of the two men changed drastically. Under the gazes of Greg Fantilli and the Morris brothers, a black shadow flashed on the surface of the coffin. The two of them immediately let out shrill cries at the same moment. The red light that was emitted from their bodies was absorbed by the coffin, and at the same time, the dark shadow of the coffin itself became denser. Quick! Save me! It seems like something has bitten my hand! One of them shouted for help. Jake and Calvin Morris immediately frowned as they both took a step back. Before knowing the situation and all the risks involved, who would dare to step forward and save the two of them? A cold light flashed, and their screams became even more miserable. Blood burst out from their hands. They both let go and then fell to the ground and rolled around in agony. Blood kept flowing out very quickly. At that critical moment, Greg Fantilli's reaction was the fastest. He raised his knife and chopped off the men's hands one by one. Take this to relieve the pain. As Kevin spoke, he put a medicinal pill into the mouths of each of the men. Suddenly, the lid of the coffin opened completely. A thick black fog emerged from the coffin, and the lid fell apart. A black snake that was almost as thick as an adult's arm appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Its blood-red eyes kept scanning everyone present. Its long and narrow forked tongue kept flicking, and a faint black fog was released from its body. A sticky liquid dripped from its mouth, and when it fell on the ground, it made a sound like that of dripping water. The hard floor was immediately corroded by its saliva, forming holes one after another. Fortunately, the moment the lid was blown open, Greg Fantilli and the others sensed that something was wrong. They quickly spread out in all directions to avoid being overtaken by the fog. Is this the dark blood snake? Greg Fantilli muttered. His face was filled with shock. What is the dark blood snake? Jake Morris asked in confusion. I don't know much about it. I only read about it. The dark blood snake is extremely poisonous. As long as you are touched by its liquid, any expert will immediately turn into a pool of liquid. The scary thing is that it doesn't only have poison coming from its mouth, it also secretes large amounts of it from all over its body. Greg Fantilli replied with a look of worry and fear.
What the hell? Are you sure you're right? Does that mean you can't even touch it?
As Jake Morris spoke, he quickly retreated, pulling away from the dark blood snake. What's more terrifying is that not only is its body covered in poison, but the black fog it releases also contains the poison, Kevin said. He took a step back as he added, also, if you are poisoned, your body will become a new source of the poison. Your body will immediately become highly toxic. It has been said that wherever this snake passed, not a single blade of grass grew. If the dark blood snake is allowed out of this place and is able to breed with another one, then within 100 years, there will not be any signs of life left on the earth. Jake Morris and the others sucked in a breath of cold air. Other than retreating, they could not think of any other way out of this situation.
That can't be right. It just can't be, Calvin Morris said disapprovingly.
The dark blood snake's body was usually very small. Under normal circumstances, it was only the thickness of a human pinky. However, the one in front of him was so large that it had clearly been surviving somehow here in these ancient ruins for a very long time. There was one thing that Kevin really couldn't understand. The spiritual energy in this place was so thin right now. What exactly did this dark blood snake rely on to survive? Suddenly, Kevin thought of a possibility. Could it be that there is some kind of treasure in the coffin that can absorb the spiritual energy of the world? Immediately, Kevin's heart began to race. He wished that he could immediately rush over and search the inside of the coffin, but the dark blood snake was standing in his way. One should know that when one reaches level 7, medicinal pills would no longer be of much use in developing one's power base. In order to advance a step further, a level 7 expert would have to find natural treasures to aid their development. Oh right, I have to remind you all of one more thing. The toxicity of the dark blood snake increases according to its age. Kevin suddenly thought of something and said, regarding these things, there were very clear records in the all-inclusive secret book.
What the hell? If that's the case, wouldn't that snake be able to destroy everything in its path?
Jake Morris said with fear in his voice. In a sense, yes, that is the case, Kevin said helplessly. He then turned around and shouted at the people behind him. All Radiance members, listen up. Retreat as quickly and as far as you can. In the face of an ancient threat like the dark blood snake, the number of people willing to fight against it was no longer important. On the contrary, if more people stayed here, they would only die for nothing while increasing the potency of the poison. All members of the Fantilli family, listen up. Retreat immediately. Greg Fantilli did not want his family to suffer too many casualties, so he followed Kevin's order with one of his own. The Morris brothers also quickly gave their own orders to their men. However, the dark blood snake didn't seem to be as cruel as the legend suggested. It just stayed where it was, flicking out its tongue as it watched everyone flee.
What's going on? Don't tell me that everything you read wasn't true.
After retreating nearly 50 feet, Jake Morris asked his question in confusion as he looked toward Kevin and then back at the dark blood snake. I don't know. It has been many years since any dark blood snake has appeared. No one knows what it is truly capable of, but it's best to avoid unnecessary danger. We'd better be extra careful. Kevin stared at the dark blood snake in the distance as he tried to explain the unexplainable. It was hard to imagine that a large group of level 5 warriors and a level 7 warrior would be so scared by one snake. But clearly, the dark blood snake had no intention of attacking unless it was provoked. It simply circled around the coffin and curled up. Finally, it settled down on top of the coffin as if it was protecting its master. Kevin and the others breathed a sigh of relief. Death had stared them in the face, and they'd beaten it to live another day. When the coffin was opened, a thick black snake emerged, emitting a dark black fog and dripping what was clearly an extremely poisonous liquid from its mouth. Kevin explained that this was the dark blood snake, an extremely rare and extremely poisonous creature. They all began to retreat as quickly as possible, but the dark blood snake made no effort to chase after them. For almost an hour, the dark blood snake seemed to have no intention of leaving the coffin. Kevin, Greg Fantilli, and many of the others knew how powerful the dark blood snake was, so they didn't dare to make any rash moves. However, Calvin Morris was not as wise. After being in a stalemate for so long, he had already grown very impatient.
I don't think this so-called dark blood snake is as powerful as you think it is. It's just that you guys have made it out to be like some kind of a god. If it is really so poisonous, why didn't it attack us?
Calvin Morris said while clenching his fist. What do you mean? Greg Fantilli turned his head and asked.
Mr. Fantilli, I'm not saying that you are just trying to scare us, but I am trying to prevent some cowards from misleading us. It wasn't easy for us to reach this place. The coffin of the Water Guardian is right in front of us. Do we really have a good reason to be scared away by a snake?
Calvin demanded to know. One had to admit that Calvin's words had a certain sense of reason, or at least no one was willing to offer a forceful rebuttal. Since you have said so, would you please take the lead for us? I'm sure everyone will be willing to follow you if you want to confront it. A faint sneer appeared on Greg Fantilli's face as he challenged Calvin. Hearing this, Kevin also turned his head, the corner of his mouth slightly raised under the mask that he wore. Jake Morris had a gloating look on his face as well. Greg Fantilli's move was really clever. Since Calvin Morris was so insistent, he was more than willing to let him take the lead. If there's any danger, he should face it first. If the situation went south, they would all still be able to retreat in time while Calvin suffered alone.
Mr. Fantilli, you're going too far, don't you think?
Calvin Morris said. He wasn't a fool, and he wasn't someone who was willing to take such risks without a guarantee. Did they all think that he would be willing to die for nothing? This was simply wishful thinking. Kevin spoke up, saying, Could it be that you are, in fact, afraid? If I'm right, just say it out loud. There is nothing shameful about this. After all, the dark blood snake is an ancient and dangerous creature. Even I, who have reached level 7, wouldn't dare face it head-on. Your power base is still so weak. It's expected that you would be afraid. No one would blame you for that. After all, you have to admit your own limitations. Kevin crossed his arms in front of his chest and kept mocking him with his words.
What did you say? Who said that I was afraid?
Calvin Morris's expression instantly turned ferocious, and sparks appeared in his eyes. Well, if you're not afraid, then please be my guest and go on over. Kevin turned his body sideways and stretched out his left hand, making a gesture toward the coffin. Kevin was confident that he understood Calvin Morris's temperament. For people like Calvin Morris, being seen as brave and always correct was the most basic character trait, and he valued his reputation more than anything. Calvin Morris quickly glanced at the others and found that they were all looking at him with smirks. Only then did he realize that he had been tricked by Kevin.
How dare you dig a hole for me to jump into? You just wait and see. When we get out of here, I will teach the entire Radiance a lesson, Calvin said.
In Calvin's opinion, he was the future patriarch of the prestigious Morris family. How could he make a fool of himself in front of so many people? Therefore, Calvin took a deep breath and resolutely walked toward the coffin. When he passed by Kevin, he even lowered his shoulder and intentionally bumped into Kevin's chest. However, Kevin didn't care about that. As long as Calvin Morris was willing to take the lead, Kevin didn't mind what he did. With a flash of cold light, Calvin Morris took out a sword and carefully approached the coffin. If he said that he didn't have any fear in his heart, it was an absolute lie. At that moment, the dark blood snake seemed to have noticed Calvin approaching. Its blood-red eyes stared at him. Its long and thin tongue kept flicking up and down. Its body was bent into the shape of a bow, as if it was ready to attack at any time. When Calvin was about 10 feet away from the coffin, the dark blood snake took the initiative to attack. A black liquid flew out of its mouth and toward Calvin Morris at lightning speed. Fortunately, Calvin Morris was not an ordinary person. He was prepared to face the attack at any time, so he reacted quickly. His right foot paused on the ground, and then he attacked to the right. But before he landed, the dark blood snake spat out another stream of venom. Luckily, Calvin reacted in time again, even though he was still in midair. He sent out a wave of spiritual energy to hit the ground, and with the help of the force of the impact, it stopped him from moving and made him spin a few rounds in the air. The venom brushed right past his cheek. Even so, he instantly smelled the foul odor. His brain was a little dizzy. When he landed on the ground, he appeared to be in bad shape and had seemingly lost his sense of balance. The two streams of venom landed on the ground and walls, respectively. The hard stones on which they landed were instantly corroded, and sizzling bubbles appeared one after another. A faint black gas was emitted, which only showed how terrifying and potent the toxicity of the venom was. "This is not good. Calvin Morris has been poisoned," Kevin frowned and said. Before he even finished speaking, Jake Morris had already moved. He came up behind Calvin and held his shoulder with his right hand to stabilize his body. Calvin Morris glanced at him out of the corner of his eye and snorted coldly, "What are you doing?" He immediately stood up and shook his head twice. Then he used his left hand to slap Jake Morris's palm off his shoulder. Seeing another person approach, the dark blood snake got angrier. It made a sharp sound and black fog radiated from its body. It attacked, with the snake's head passing between the two of them. It then spread out its body in the air and bit Calvin while its tail swung toward Jake. The two of them moved in opposite directions. Two loud slapping sounds were heard. The dark blood snake landed on the ground. Its tail quickly coiled up. It raised its head high and spat venom at the two of them again. "Again? Is there no end to this?" Jake Morris complained while dodging the venom again. Calvin Morris did not choose to dodge again. He opened his hands and drew a large circle in front of him. Dark blue spiritual energy quickly condensed into a wall in the air. When the poison hit the wall, something that could make a person's scalp tingle happened. The wall of spiritual energy quickly corroded. In less than 2 seconds, it had completely turned black. "Its poison can even corrode spiritual energy?" Greg Fantilli said in shock. Then Calvin made his move with Jake by his side. Powerful pressure suddenly came from both of their bodies and fell on the dark blood snake from both directions. The pressure was so strong that it instantly shattered the ground around the dark blood snake, but its body did not seem to be affected. The dark blood snake's body glowed with an intense light as it hissed. It instantly counterattacked and shattered Jake Morris's pressure. Jake seemed to have suffered some injuries. He groaned and took several steps back. Fortunately, he had bought enough time for Calvin to carve a complicated pattern in the air with his spiritual energy. With the dark blood snake as the center, a separate space with a radius of about 6 feet was formed. The red light in the dark blood snake's eye shone brightly. It seemed to have sensed the danger and wanted to get out of the circle as quickly as possible. However, when it started moving, it was immediately blocked by an invisible barrier. But the dark blood snake was unwilling to give up and started to try escaping in different directions. Suddenly, a thunderous roar sounded from within the circle. A thick bolt of lightning descended from above and accurately struck the dark blood snake's body. Immediately after, several more bolts of lightning fell in succession. The dark blood snake continuously moved and struggled, but it could not even dodge one bolt of lightning. It let out hisses one after another, and the black fog that it emitted became weaker and weaker. After the lightning finally dissipated, a fist-sized ball of fire fell from the sky. The dark blood snake could not dodge it. It could only curl up its body and circulate its own spiritual energy to try to resist. What a powerful technique. Once you are trapped in it, you won't be able to dodge the electricity, Kevin said with a serious expression on his face. Of course it's powerful. This is one of the Morris family's signature techniques. Rumor has it that their family has a total of 8 such techniques, Greg Fantilli explained. The Morris family has been in existence for several generations, and they claim to be the descendants of a faction within the Pinnacle. They have been pursuing the limits of what is possible for generations. This is also the reason why the Morris family is still so famous in the upper realm. It's a pity that Calvin Morris's cultivation base has yet to reach its peak. He has yet to fully display the full power of this technique. Kevin just lightly nodded his head a few times. At the same time, he was also secretly surprised. These families, which had knowledge that had been passed down for many years, did indeed have a lot of powerful techniques up their sleeves. When the barrage finally let up, Calvin Morris's face looked very pale. Obviously, he did not have enough spiritual energy to maintain this kind of punishment on the dark blood snake. The complex pattern in front of him also gradually disappeared. At this time, Kevin and the others could not help but look in the circle. They saw that the black fog on the dark blood snake's body had mostly disappeared. Many of the black scales on the snake's body were clearly damaged. The ground was completely corroded by its poisonous blood and had turned into a dark liquid. After the attack ended, the dark blood snake quickly reacted. It raised its head again and let out a sharp and long hiss. Boundless spirit energy was released from its body, creating ripples in the air. The walls around them seemed to tremble with the dark blood snake's hiss, continuously producing crackling sounds. The originally flat walls were filled with holes, and black shadows quickly emerged from within. When Kevin and the others took a closer look, they were all stunned on the spot. The countless black shadows were actually all poisonous snakes. It was as if they were in a snake cave. Countless poisonous snakes intertwined together, flicking out their tongues, rubbing against the ground, and making a rustling sound. It made them all have goosebumps all over their bodies. "This is a disaster," Greg Fantilli said in a daze. Kevin sucked in a breath of air. The dark blood snake let out another loud hiss as if it was ordering the group of snakes to attack Kevin and the others. The snakes kept approaching them. Calvin Morris flashed to Jake Morris and grabbed his shoulder, then came back to where Kevin and the others stood. "I hope one of you has an idea. What should we do next?" Jake Morris asked anxiously. "The only way is to kill our way out of here," Kevin said as he reached his right hand behind his back, and the night sword appeared in his hand. "How can we kill our way out with so many poisonous snakes in our way?" Calvin Morris asked. For the first time, he felt truly powerless. The use of the powerful technique had consumed a large amount of his spiritual energy. Now, not to mention killing his way out, even protecting himself seemed to be very difficult. "Then you can stay here. Try to see how long it takes for these snakes to eat you all the way down to the bone." Kevin waved the sword in his hand and sent out a burst of spiritual energy, forming a protective barrier in front of them, cutting off the dozen snakes that were about to attack. "He's right. There is still a chance of survival if we rush out of here. If you stay here, you will only die," Greg Fantilli said, having also made up his mind. Carrying the sword in his hand, Greg Fantilli was the first to rush out as scores of deadly reptiles prepared for a mass attack. After the Morris brothers made their best effort to repel the dark blood snake with a powerful formation, cracks appeared in the walls and ceiling, and dozens of other snakes emerged. Having used up a considerable amount of his spiritual energy already, Calvin Morris was at a loss. But Greg Fantilli urged them all that their chance to fight their way out was now or never. It was clear that all of the snakes were extremely poisonous. Under such circumstances, the protection of spiritual energy would not be very effective for long. If one wanted to leave this place alive, they could only rely on speed. A battle between humans and snakes broke out in an instant. Kevin's situation was a little better than that of the others. After all, he had the strength of a level 7 expert, and as such, his sense of danger was far greater than anyone else's. However, Jake Morris and the others weren't so lucky. They had barely been able to deal with the onslaught from the very beginning. As they struggled to advance, more and more wounds appeared on their bodies. Soon, the first person fell. Calvin Morris had consumed too much of his spiritual energy, and he didn't have enough left to support him. His lips had turned purple-black, and he collapsed. The moment he fell, Jake Morris came to his side. The spiritual energy in his own body bloomed and made the surrounding snakes retreat slightly. It was not exactly true that he was sincerely trying to save Calvin Morris. The relationship between these two brothers had never been seen through by outsiders. They could kill each other without leaving any room for negotiation. In other words, if this was within the family, if the current situation happened to Jake Morris instead, the first person to step forward would definitely have been Calvin Morris. Neither of them would allow the other to die in the hands of another person or of some other enemy. If they wanted the other to die, they would have to die by their own hands. This was also the reason why Jake Morris was the first one to step forward when Calvin Morris was in danger. However, under the attack of the snakes, it was already difficult for Jake Morris to protect himself, let alone carry the heavy burden of his brother. Soon, the snakes reached him as well. Suddenly, Greg Fantilli also let out a muffled sound of pain. He did not know which snake it was, but it bit hard into his shoulder and tore off a large piece of his flesh. The poison spread quickly. Greg stomped hard on the ground and forced the poisonous snake to retreat. He stabbed his sword into the ground to support his body so that he would not fall to the ground. Greg originally wanted to use some kind of large-scale martial technique, but the poison spread too quickly. He closed his eyes and fell to the ground. "Blue Storm Technique," Kevin called out. Kevin's chest heaved up and down slightly. He took out a pill and swallowed it. The dense swarm of snakes instantly stopped moving. The snakes that were entrenched in the ground stared at Kevin. There was some fear and doubt in their eyes. Perhaps they didn't expect Kevin to be so powerful. He was able to control the entire space in an instant. "Dark Blood Snake, I know that you have gained some intelligence. Now I will make a deal with you. I won't harm you, but you must also control the snakes and give us a way out of here," Kevin said while holding the night sword in his hand. Kevin snapped his fingers and removed the confinement spell from only the Dark Blood Snake. At that moment, the Dark Blood Snake did not attack Kevin. Instead, it just stared at him as if it was thinking about the gap between it and Kevin. Looking at Kevin, the Dark Blood Snake hissed, and the black fog on its body was released again. The Dark Blood Snake slithered over to the coffin, took out a box, and threw it toward Kevin. The Dark Blood Snake indeed had a certain level of intelligence, just as Kevin had said. It was very clear about the current situation, so it could only choose to compromise to save its own life. Kevin grabbed the box and then looked at the Dark Blood Snake. He then opened the box and an emerald green light bloomed. A lifelike eagle was carved on a gemstone that was nearly the size of his palm. What surprised Kevin was that the gemstone's spiritual energy was shockingly pure. For some reason, Kevin had the notion that if he could refine the spiritual energy contained in it for his own use, he would definitely be able to break through to the upper limit of his power base. Suddenly, Kevin saw something inside the coffin that shocked him. It was a black thing the size of a grape. Kevin felt as if his soul was about to be sucked into it just by looking at it. "Is that a 10 Directions fragment?" Kevin thought subconsciously in surprise. Before he could react, the Dark Blood Snake hissed loudly and pulled his thoughts back to reality. Looking at the Dark Blood Snake, Kevin knew that it was urging him to leave. Ignoring the 10 Directions fragment, Kevin pointed at Jake Morris and the others. If he had a choice, Kevin would not save these people, especially not Calvin Morris. However, he had no other choice. These people were all from big families. If all of them died here and he was the only one who got out, he would be left with no way to defend himself. The Dark Blood Snake didn't want to take their lives. Instead, it signaled Kevin to remove the Blue Storm technique first. Then you have to make the snakes retreat a bit faster. Kevin reminded the Dark Blood Snake with some worry. After all, there were too many snakes. When the effects of the Blue Storm technique disappeared, the snakes regained their ability to move again. Each of them lunged towards the people in front of them, wanting to bite Calvin Morris and the others. At that moment, the Dark Blood Snake suddenly let out a loud hiss. The snakes immediately stopped and retreated to the wall like a tide. Kevin thought for a moment, then nodded at the Water Guardian's coffin before turning and leaving with his people. When Jake Morris and the others regained consciousness, they were already on the island. The subordinates of the various forces surrounded them. "Sir, how do you feel? Are you feeling any pain?" someone asked him. About 3 hours ago, when the people who withdrew from the ruins heard the commotion inside, they were concerned. However, they did not receive a clear order and did not dare to enter without permission. When Kevin brought everyone out, the group of people was anxious. They all thought that Kenneth Wilkinson had been the one to injure Greg Fantilli and the others. With the help of 2 people, Greg Fantilli slowly stood up from the ground and walked over to Elijah Tanner. "What do you want?" Elijah Tanner asked as he tensed his body and scanned the surrounding people. "Please don't be nervous. May I ask where the Radiance's Chancellor is? We are here to thank him for saving our lives," Greg Fantilli said sincerely. They were clearly heavily poisoned in the ancient ruins, so it was definitely Kenneth Wilkinson who had saved them and removed the poison from their bodies. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had saved all of their lives. Although Calvin Morris was unwilling to admit it, he was not so stubborn as to ignore the truth, at least in his heart. Kevin slowly opened his eyes when he heard the voice. He came in front of the people of the Radiance and said to them, "It's not a big deal. It's just that if the Radiance needs your help in the future, I hope you won't reject us too quickly." "Don't worry, sir. The Fantilli family will remember this favor. If there is a chance in the future, I will do my best to repay it," Greg Fantilli replied. "If you have anything to say, you'd better tell me. Don't make me owe you a favor." Calvin Morris turned his head to the side and said. Jake Morris did not say anything, but the smile and look on his face were enough to prove a lot. 2 hours later, the group of people left the island. When they boarded the ship, there was a rumbling sound under the island, and then the island quickly sank into the water. Kevin knew that it must be the Dark Blood Snake's doing. It must have triggered some mechanism, causing the island to sink into the lake so that no one could disturb its master's peace. Trevor McCandless walked out of the cabin with his men. When he saw that the people from the Radiance were safe and sound, surprise flashed across his eyes. "The Radiance's Chancellor is indeed powerful. I wonder if he has gained anything from this trip," Trevor McCandless said with a secret meaning behind his words. "Wouldn't you know if I had gained anything?" Kevin said coldly. Now he could completely confirm this guess. The ancient ruins of the Water Guardian had already been cleaned up by the government's forces. The things that still remained were all left by them on purpose. "You must be joking. I don't have the ability to predict the future. How could I have known in advance?" A menacing look flashed across Trevor McCandless's eyes. "Where are the others?" Kevin asked, having suddenly realized that something was wrong. Other than them, there were only people from the government on the ship. Where did people from the Southeast School for Natural Medicine and all the others go? "You don't know? They already went back. Not everyone has strength like you," Trevor McCandless casually replied. Kevin frowned slightly. He didn't believe that anyone from the great powers would leave so easily. However, he didn't have any conclusive evidence to refute Trevor's words. Just like when they first came, the people of the Radiant stuck together and quickly got off the ship after arriving at the dock. You guys go and rest. All expenses in Chicago will be reimbursed by the Radiants. Remember to be careful of your whereabouts. Don't be discovered by the government's forces, Kevin emphasized.
Yes, sir.
After everyone answered respectfully, they all left. You two follow me, Kevin said to two of them. He was naturally eager to go back and see Lily. Meanwhile, by the remains of the water guardian that had sunk to the bottom of the lake, a figure appeared in front of the coffin like a ghost. The dark blood snake instantly rose up and looked at the person in front of him searchingly. However, with just a glance, the dark blood snake fainted.
I didn't think that after being dead for so many years you would still have such a loyal pet.
The man reached out his right hand and stroked the coffin for a moment. Finally, he put the dark blood snake into his bag. Then he took out a pigeon egg-sized gem from the coffin.
Kevin is really stupid. He even left behind such a powerful thing, the man said.
As soon as he finished speaking, the man disappeared from the room and everything returned to normal. 3 days passed in a flash. Kevin trained during the days and spent the nights with Lily. His small life was very comfortable and, for the moment, very happy. But Kevin knew that could change in an instant. After escaping the ancient ruins, Kevin wondered where all the other experts from the different schools had gone. When Trevor McCandless told him that they had all left already, this raised suspicions in Kevin's mind. But he had no proof to refute his words. Upon his return to Chicago, Kevin split the next 3 days between training and spending time with Lily. Back in the Salix Leaf Hotel, Vincent Reeves was casually looking at the scenery outside the windows. In his eyes, Chicago was just an insignificant place that was far less important than Washington. If it wasn't for his trip to the ancient ruins at Lake Erie, he would much rather have stayed in Herbalist City rather than come here. Speaking of this matter, he couldn't help but express some grievance over what had happened at the ancient ruins. After being forced to stand back due to the threat of the statue-like warriors, Vincent immediately brought his men to search other areas, hoping to find anything of value that he could bring back to the Herbalist Society. In the end, he realized it was a wasted effort. He found nothing. However, as he was about to fly back to Washington, he had been alerted of other noteworthy things happening in Chicago, giving him another wave of trouble to deal with. Just then, the private room's doors were pushed open from the outside. When Vincent Reeves turned his head to look at the person who came in, he was stunned.
I didn't expect to be meeting with you today. I should have known a long time ago that this was your plan all along.
Vincent's face looked serious as he uttered this to both himself and the person who entered the room. In a place like Chicago, who else could make Vincent react with this kind of attitude other than Kevin? Kevin gave him a sly smile and then casually pulled over a chair and sat down.
I just happened to be sent here at the last minute before flying back to Washington. After all, thanks to you, the Herbalist Society no longer has a branch in all of the Midwest.
Vincent frowned slightly and stared at Kevin as he spoke. Vincent's position under Earl Mathis was always shaky, and Vincent's inability to control Kevin's rise only made it harder for him to be secure in his own hold on power. Then what exactly did you come here today for? Are you here to congratulate me, or could it be that you want to get your hands on another one of my pill formulas? Kevin asked as he looked about the room to make certain Vincent was alone. If they were still in Washington right now, he would definitely be more careful not to offend Vincent, given the looming presence of the Herbalist Society's headquarters. However, the situation was reversed at the moment. After all, Chicago was Kevin's territory, so if Vincent lost his temper and snapped at him, there was no telling what would happen next.
First, you instigated the rebellion of the Herbalist Society's Midwest branch. Then you became the champion of the herbalism competition. So why do you keep challenging the authority of the Herbalist Society? Does the Radiance have a personal vendetta against us or something?
Vincent narrowed his eyes and asked. Chairman Mathis really thinks too highly of the Radiants. The Herbalist Society is a big and famous organization. How could we dare to oppose you? Besides, the Radiance has never violated any laws, Kevin replied. Hearing this, Vincent Reeves took a long time to weigh Kevin's words. Kevin did not say anything that was, in fact, wrong. Although Kevin hadn't shown himself at the ancient ruins, Vincent was able to witness the strength of the Radiance, which boasted a group of more than a dozen level 5 warriors. On top of that, Kevin had left behind a few more level 5 warriors in Washington. Adding Kevin and Kenneth Wilkinson, who were both level 7 experts, it would be hard to find a lineup this strong in Washington or even anywhere in the Upper Realm. Because of this, Vincent couldn't help but wonder how the Radiance was able to recruit and develop so many powerful experts without drawing the attention of anyone. Why aren't you saying anything? Could it be that you find yourself unable to refute what I just said? Kevin teased with a smile. At the same time, in the Steele family's mansion, several of Dalton Steele's bodyguards were gathered in the courtyard. No one else from the Steele family was present tonight, as the entire place was surrounded by the people of the Myriads.
Brett, why did you bring so many people here with you?
Dalton asked as he turned his head both ways and cast his eyes over the many Myriad soldiers Brett had as his backup. I believe that you have also heard the news. It's best to be extra careful these days. Brett Stewart responded with a look in his eyes that was hard for Dalton to read. As Dalton Steele flicked the ashes from the cigar in his hand, his face turned gloomy. After all, he did hear that something big had happened to the forces of the great powers recently. Among those who went to the ancient ruins of the Water Guardian, besides the Radiant and the Herbalist Society, only the people of the Upper Realm and the Morris family were able to return. Meanwhile, the rest of the teams that were sent by the different schools of the great powers had all mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Therefore, everyone in the expert world was alarmed, and various schools and organizations sent a large number of their forces to Lake Erie to investigate the situation.
Do you know something else about this matter?
Dalton asked without changing his expression. It's just some rumors. As for whether they're true or not, it's difficult to say. It still needs to be investigated, Brett replied as he leaned back on the sofa in a manner so casual that it would seem that he wasn't greatly worried.
Then why did you come to see me today? I'm assuming that this isn't just a friendly visit,
Dalton remarked while trying to match Brett's casual air. You're right. I do have something that I wanted to talk to you about. A hint of anticipation flashed across Brett's eyes as he continued. I heard that you recently saw Kevin and the Williams family didn't do anything to take revenge on him, despite what he did to Ethan Williams. Can I take it that the two of you have finally forgotten about your past grudges with one another? Although Brett Stewart was the supreme commander of the Myriads, he knew that most of the people around him were simply trying to gain favor with him. Within the entire organization, the only person who was truly worthy of his trust was Roger Knott. However, Roger was an old man, and it would be unrealistic to expect him to be in his corner forever. As such, Brett attached even greater importance to the brotherhood that existed between him, Kevin, and Dalton. Hearing this, Dalton was slightly upset, but his expression did not change much as he firmly replied,
Regarding the matter between me and Kevin, the one thing I can assure you is that no matter how our conflict ends, I won't make things difficult for you.
Brett thought seriously for a moment, then finally sighed and said, I will say the same thing that I told you before. No matter who dies between the two of you, I will still lose one brother. Not wanting to linger on this issue anymore, Dalton asked,
Brett, is that really the only reason why you came looking for me today?
Of course not. I have another important matter to discuss with you. Brett slowly revealed his true purpose for coming here as he continued. Although many of my men were killed during the battle with the Alliance, the foundation of the Myriads wasn't affected to any great degree. Given this, the younger members of the organization have been stepping up more frequently in recent years. At the same time, many of the senior members like Roger Knott have considered retiring after many years of service. As for the other higher-ups, all of them have died in the battle, so I plan to make some changes by restructuring the organization. Dalton Steele finally understood why Brett Stewart had brought so many people with him. It turned out that it wasn't just because of the disappearance of the Great Powers experts that happened recently, but also because of the internal conflict within the Myriads. He had long heard that the Myriads had suffered heavy losses at the hands of the Alliance. Now it seemed like Brett Stewart had used the battle with the Alliance to get rid of all of those causing trouble for him within the organization. Similarly, for those who were supposedly considering retirement, Brett intended to force that issue as a way of simplifying his power structure. At the moment, Dalton Steele knew that the Supreme Commander and the Deputy Leader were the two highest positions in the Myriads. Aside from elders like Roger Knott, below them were the 12 envoys and 6 protectors, as well as 36 enforcers. Since Brett had cleared the Myriads of everyone who had been appointed by the previous regime, he could now restructure these titles and place his own people in all of the organization's key positions of power.
Brett, you can decide this matter yourself. After all, you are the Supreme Commander, so what right would I have to interfere?
Dalton replied with a slight frown. After all, while the previous Supreme Commander, Travis Adams, had taken him in as his protege shortly before his death, he never really joined the Myriads as an official member. So if he became too involved with this matter, many people within the organization would surely think that he was just seizing the opportunity to use his relationship with Brett Stewart to gain some special position for himself. Moreover, these people could eventually turn Brett against him by presenting him as a potential threat to his power.
What's wrong with that? Why can't you and Kevin have a say in this matter?
Brett responded with slight displeasure and continued.
Anyway, I've decided that apart from the Deputy Leader, there will only be 10 elders, 5 envoys, and 1 enforcer left after the restructuring. I'm afraid that some people will question your authority if you do this,
Dalton replied with a concerned look. From Dalton's perspective, by significantly decreasing the number of people who held power in the Myriads, it was inevitable that some people would start to resent Brett Stewart and those who were eventually chosen to be his trusted aides. After all, power was a very tempting thing, especially for those who had already come into contact with its charm.
Do you think that there are still people who won't be willing to accept it? Even if there are, they should only be a small minority. If something happens to me, I will bury them all with me.
A strong killing intent suddenly flashed across Brett's eyes as he said this. He then added,
That being said, I have already decided that you will be the head of the 10 elders.
However, upon hearing this, Dalton did not reveal any hint of joy or gratitude. Instead, his expression became serious as his brows furrowed. Even though the Myriad seemed to be in a sort of retreat and regrouping period, Brett Stewart had been actively making moves behind the scenes to consolidate all of the organization's power and responsibilities around him. Now Brett's actions had just bound Dalton tightly to the Myriads as well. Back in the Salix Leaf Hotel, the private room's interior had turned into a mess. After hearing the commotion inside, there were now more than a dozen bodyguards standing at the door. As Kevin held the night dagger with one hand, the white light kept flashing back and forth in the midst of his battle with Vincent Reeves.
Those who don't want to die, leave immediately,
Kevin yelled as he glanced at the security guards outside. Hearing this, the security guards felt relieved and immediately fled the scene. After all, they were not fools, and they could tell that these two were not ordinary people. If they continued to stay any longer, it would be no different than waiting for their own death. When Brett Stewart revealed his desire to restructure the Myriads, Dalton Steele realized that the battle against the Alliance was part of Brett's plan to eliminate any internal conflict and consolidate the organization's power around him. But since he wasn't an official member, Dalton was initially reluctant to express his opinion on the matter. However, after being urged to speak up, Dalton shared his concern that some members would resent and question Brett's authority by significantly decreasing the number of people who held power. Given this, Brett reassured him that the remaining dissidents would be a small minority at most, then appointed Dalton as head of the 10 elders. Meanwhile, back at the Salix Leaf Hotel, Kevin and Vincent Reeves were in the midst of a tense battle.
If you can't even protect yourself, then what gives you the right to demand your freedom? Kevin, you should know that the Herbalist Society has already opted to spare your life countless times in the past. Otherwise, with your ant-like strength, we would have crushed you in the Radiance a long time ago,
Vincent Reeves said. However, there was one more thing that he didn't say out loud. It wasn't that the Herbalist Society had deliberately chosen not to eliminate the Radiance all this time. The truth was that the higher-ups of the Herbalist Society had long wanted to get rid of the Radiance because they were threatened by the large number of pill formulas that the organization possessed. However, even though they had already sent out a large number of people to track down the Radiance's headquarters, they still didn't know its exact location. The Herbalist Society feared that scouts seeking the Radiance's headquarters had either been killed or bribed into joining. As such, after Vincent Reeves had finished his trip to the ancient ruins at Lake Erie, he was not in a hurry to return to Washington. Instead, he brought some people with him to find out the whereabouts of the Radiance's headquarters himself.
Kevin, it's best for you to know your own limitations. No matter how strong the Radiance is, it doesn't matter. At most, you can only show off your strength in the lower realm. So if I were you, I would consider my long-term outlook more seriously.
Vincent warned him. He then continued,
As long as you and Kenneth Wilkinson are willing to join the Herbalist Society, I guarantee that both of you will be able to reach the upper realm and rise to the top in the future.
We will enter the upper realm with our own strength. If the Herbalist Society really wants to obtain all of the Radiance's formulas, you will have to kill me now for them. Kevin snorted at Vincent in a cold voice.
Kevin, why do you need to be so stubborn? Do you know that I actually admired your abilities before? Unfortunately, you are too arrogant for your own good. Since you cannot be used by the Herbalist Society, I can't keep you alive any longer.
As soon as his voice fell, Vincent's facial expression became more vicious.
There are too many eyes here. Let's fight somewhere else.
After saying that, Vincent Reeves disappeared from where he stood in a flash of white light, and Kevin immediately followed. Deep in his heart, Kevin wanted to test the exact power base of the Herbalist Society's commissioner. In the blink of an eye, the two of them arrived at a dense forest on the outskirts of Chicago. At that moment, Vincent's body was glowing brightly as he held a long spear with an eagle engraved on it.
Kevin, I would like to pay my respects to you in advance for what I'm about to do.
Vincent sneered. In his eyes, Kevin was already a dead man. It's better for you not to speak. Otherwise, you might have to eat your words, Kevin retorted. Upon hearing this, an intense amount of spiritual energy instantly burst out from Vincent Reeves's body. As the sky above them suddenly turned gloomy, the long spear in his hand was now surrounded by flickering lightning. With Vincent's powerful pressure enveloping him, Kevin's facial expression changed drastically as he stared at him in disbelief. Vincent Reeves was indeed the commissioner of the Herbalist Society for a reason. After many years of training, his power base had finally broken through to the final stage of level 7. Being so close to reaching its threshold, he was on the cusp of transitioning from an expert to a master, something even Vincent feared he would never be able to achieve.
Kevin, I know you are a level 7 expert, but there has never been a lack of talented people in this world. I was once deemed an extraordinary talent too back when I was your age.
A sinister smile then appeared on Vincent's face, as if he was very satisfied with Kevin's surprised look. He then yelled,
Soaring Eagle Technique.
With that, Vincent waved his long spear with both hands and rushed toward Kevin. Blue Storm Technique, Kevin roared, not daring to delay any longer. Since reaching level 7, this was the first time that he had faced an expert who was stronger than he was. He then raised his night dagger high into the air and bravely charged toward Vincent. When their weapons collided, a strong wave of spiritual energy rippled across the entire forest, violently uprooting several trees and sending them crashing down all around him. When the dust clouds had settled, Kevin quickly drew a complicated pattern in the air. With more and more spiritual energy gathering around him, he then pointed his night dagger at Vincent and started running toward him again. Facing such a fierce attack, Vincent's expression did not change. Vincent threw the long spear in his hand. After spinning a few rounds in the air, it collided with the night dagger with a loud clang, sending Kevin flying into the air before crashing into some trees with a heavy thud. Kevin let out a muffled groan and his face turned pale. Despite this, he immediately got back up and asked, "Is that all you've got?" This time, Kevin tossed the night dagger high up into the air and formed a seal with his palm. "Do you think I'm afraid of you? Today I will definitely defeat you once and for all," Kevin declared as he used his spiritual energy to control the movement of the night dagger as it started falling from the sky. Seeing this, Vincent could already tell that it was aimed directly at his head. He then quickly surrounded himself with a protective barrier of spiritual energy while raising the long spear in his hand to defend himself. When the night dagger was about to land, Vincent swung his long spear at it. When the two weapons fiercely collided, a terrifying wave of air immediately spread out in all directions once again. In the end, the night dagger was sent flying backward, but before Kevin could catch it with his hand, it was grabbed by Vincent, who suddenly appeared in front of him. "Give it back," Kevin demanded. Right now, he did not care about how much spiritual energy he had just consumed, and only wanted to snatch the night dagger back from Vincent. "Do you really want this little knife back? You have two choices. Either you pledge your loyalty to the Herbalist Society or you can try to take it back from me," Vincent offered as he playfully waved the night dagger around in front of him. Of course, other than to annoy Kevin, he had other intentions in mind. That was to force Kevin to use another weapon. The night sword was used by Kenneth Wilkinson. This was because deep down in his heart, Vincent Reeves had long suspected that Kevin Williams and Kenneth Wilkinson were actually one and the same. After all, when either of them appeared, the other person would always be nowhere to be found. Furthermore, it was already enough for the Radiants to have one level 7 expert in Kevin. If another appeared in the form of Kenneth Wilkinson, then how could the people of the upper realm keep up with this lower realm organization? However, upon hearing this, Kevin simply looked at Vincent and sneered. "Commissioner Reeves, don't blame me for not reminding you. My night dagger is not something that just anyone can hold, so I advise you to return it to me immediately. Otherwise, you will regret it." Vincent snorted back disdainfully. "What a joke. Kevin, do you think I was born yesterday? It's just a knife. How can you be so angry over—" Before he finished speaking, Vincent's face suddenly changed as the night dagger in his hand bloomed with a bright blood-red light. What shocked him even more was that the night dagger released a powerful suction force. 1 moment ago, he merely held this weapon casually in his hand, but now it seemed that the night dagger was stuck to his palm. Moreover, as the suction force grew stronger and stronger, Vincent could feel that his spiritual energy was being rapidly devoured by the night dagger like a black hole. This made him frown and immediately want to throw the night dagger aside. However, what he did not expect was that no matter how much strength he used, he could not manage to get it out of his hand. As the night dagger glowed brighter and brighter, Kevin's body also began to emit the same faint blood-red light at the same time. Suddenly, Kevin could feel a majestic power continuously flowing into his body. In just a few seconds, the night dagger had devoured close to 1/3 of Vincent Reeves' spiritual energy. "This isn't good. If I let it continue to absorb my spiritual energy, all of my strength will eventually be sucked dry," Vincent muttered, then turned to look at Kevin and roared. "Why aren't you stopping?" "I already warned you earlier. Not everyone can hold my night dagger without facing the consequences." Kevin spread his hands and made a helpless expression, then added, "Now that things have reached this point, even I don't know what to do." "You?" Vincent wanted to say more, but he could not find any way to refute it. After taking a moment to consider his options, Vincent gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. Suddenly, he had made a decision in his heart. Using his left hand, he firmly took out his sword. Then a white light flashed as Vincent swiftly chopped off his own hand. With a muffled groan, he subconsciously took a few steps back from the pain and quickly used some spiritual energy to close off the wound to stop the bleeding. Seeing this, Kevin was shocked. Such boldness was not something that an ordinary person could possess. Meanwhile, when Vincent looked again at the hand that he had just cut off, his pupils violently contracted. Without enough spiritual energy to support itself, it looked like a broken tree branch that had dried up over time. Since there was nothing left to devour, the night dagger flew back into Kevin's hand. At that moment, the entire knife glistened with a bright blood-red light. At the same time, Vincent raised his head to the sky and let out a terrifying roar.
Kevin!
Losing his right hand had filled his heart with indescribable rage. One should know that the higher the power base of an expert, the more attention he needs to pay to his body. After all, only a well-maintained physique can accommodate a strong power base. Given this, Vincent Reeves had been stuck at the final stage of level 7 for more than 10 years. But recently he had gained some insight on how to break through and was ready to return to the Herbalist Society for seclusion after taking care of this matter in Chicago. However, he did not expect to lose his right hand and have 1/3 of his spiritual energy devoured today. With his foundation shaken significantly, it would now be undoubtedly impossible for him to improve his power base anytime soon.
If I don't take your life today, then all of this would have been for nothing. Giant tornado technique,
Vincent exclaimed. A terrifying aura surrounded his body, as he now seemed to have entered into a state of madness. A second later, a pure white light burst from Vincent Reeves's body, and the clouds in the sky began to swirl rapidly above him. Under the influence of his spiritual energy, the clouds then gathered into a giant tornado that was about to descend on Kevin. Seeing this, Kevin's eyes widened in shock. No longer having any thoughts of continuing this battle, he immediately turned around and started running as fast as he could to escape. Even though they were both level 7 experts, Kevin knew very well that his strength was no match for someone who was already at its final stage and on the verge of becoming a master.
You think you can run away from me? Let's see about that,
Vincent ferociously taunted. In an instant, a pale white light burst out of his body and covered an area that spanned a 100-foot radius. This caused Kevin to suddenly hit the edge of its barrier. This is not good, Kevin thought to himself as he turned his head around to take a glance. By now, a rumbling sound echoed throughout the entire forest as the fierce tornado had already reached the ground and was headed straight toward him. With no way to dodge this, Kevin could only clench his teeth and brace himself for impact as the tornado enveloped him. When the cloud of dust finally cleared, Kevin was lying on the ground. As he slowly got back on his feet, his face was extremely pale and he spat out a mouthful of blood. But before he could do anything else, Vincent Reeves attacked him again with unrelenting force. After Vincent Reeves managed to snatch the night dagger away from Kevin, his plan to prove his suspicion that he and Kenneth Wilkinson were actually the same person backfired, as the weapon soon began to rapidly devour his spiritual energy like a black hole. Unable to shake off the night dagger, Vincent was left with no choice but to chop off his right hand. Enraged by this, Vincent retaliated by using his spiritual energy to send a fierce tornado toward Kevin. Despite realizing that his strength was no match for Vincent's power base, Kevin failed to escape and was enveloped by the tornado. Seeing that Kevin was in dire straits from this, Vincent showed no mercy and attacked him again.
Kevin, if it's the last thing that I do, I will kill you today.
Vincent Reeves's face looked ferocious, and his eyes were filled with hatred as he roared. While Kevin was able to raise his hands to protect his chest, Vincent's violent force was too much to overcome, and he was sent flying backwards in an instant. Along the way, he crashed into several tall trees before falling to the ground with a heavy thud. He then let out a muffled groan and spat out a mouthful of blood. Just as Kevin had gotten up and stabilized his body, Vincent once again arrived in front of him and kicked him in the chest. Upon impact with the hard ground again, Kevin felt as if both of his arms had been broken in an instant. In the face of such a powerful force, Kevin could no longer lift himself up again, and his entire body soon fell to the ground in a heap. Seeing this, Vincent decided to seize the opportunity and delivered a vicious kick to the middle of Kevin's back. With this, a cracking sound was heard as Kevin's body sank into the soil. When Kevin raised his head, blood gushed out of his mouth again. It was not that he didn't want to fight back, but Vincent Reeves had attacked quickly. Moreover, his strength was so strong that he could not resist it any longer. On the surface, the difference in strength between someone who had just broken through to level 7 and another who was already at its final stage might not seem big to ordinary people, but Kevin could clearly tell that he was no match for Vincent. Aside from this, Vincent was firmly intent on killing Kevin, especially after having to cut off his right hand because of him.
Kevin, today will be your last day on this earth, but don't worry, I'll make sure to give you a quick death.
Vincent Reeves's eyes were filled with killing intent as he said this. To add insult to injury, he then stepped on Kevin's left leg with force. With a muffled sound, Kevin's breath was as thin as a thread, and his life seemed to be completely at Vincent's mercy as he took out a dagger and stabbed it toward the back of Kevin's head. However, just as the tip of the dagger was less than an inch away from piercing through Kevin's skull, Vincent suddenly froze.
Who's there? Why don't you come out and show yourself?
Vincent shouted as he turned his head and looked around the woods. But before Vincent could say anything else, a monstrous pressure wrapped around his entire body. It was the first time in his life that he had encountered something like this. Whoever was behind this, Vincent knew that even the Herbalist Society's chairman Earl Mathis wouldn't be able to break free from this person's hold.
If you don't come out soon, Kevin's life will be in danger,
Vincent threatened with a serious expression. He really couldn't understand how such a strong person was hiding in Chicago. Could it be that this person was also from the Radiance? Just as Vincent Reeves's voice fell, an intense gust of wind blew past the trees, causing some leaves to fall to the ground. When he turned his head, he saw that there was a dazzling light less than 30 feet away from him. This light emitted from a mysterious figure who looked like an expert of legendary status.
Who are you?
Vincent stared vigilantly at the person and asked. Judging from the spiritual energy coming from the man's body, it was clear that his power base had long surpassed level 7. However, off the top of his head, Vincent couldn't figure out who this person could be.
You are not qualified to know who I am. You only need to know that I am here to save someone today.
The person replied in a calm tone. When the man approached, a flower seemed to appear out of thin air under his feet to support him.
Blue storm technique?
Vincent retorted arrogantly, then added,
Do you think that you can save Kevin with that? If you know what's good for you, you should just go back to where you came from.
We'll see about that, the man responded as he slightly turned his right hand. In an instant, more than a dozen strange flowers appeared beside him, while everything else around Vincent Reeves, including Kevin, had seemingly disappeared without a trace. Who else could have such great ability and mastered the Blue Storm technique other than Leo Hayes?
If you have the ability, why don't you try attacking me?
Vincent snorted at him with a face full of scorn.
As you wish.
Leo smiled. As he casually waved his right hand again, the flowers surrounding his body suddenly flew out toward Vincent with a sharp, ear-piercing sound. Seeing the flower's sharp petals cutting through the air, Vincent did not dare to be careless in the face of such an attack. He then drew a circle with his left hand to create a protective barrier around him. However, to his surprise, these flowers did not make any sound or generate any intense sparks upon impact. Instead, they just quietly pierced through the barrier and passed through Vincent's body.
That's it?
Vincent frowned and looked at the strange flowers that passed through his body. Because nothing seemed to happen to him, he consequently withdrew his shield.
As I suspected, your attack was just a bluff, and the so-called Blue Storm technique is really nothing more than a visual illusion that aims to strike fear in one's heart.
Vincent sneered arrogantly.
I have already seen through your trick. If that's all you can do, what makes you think that you can save Kevin?
Hearing this, Leo Hayes did not say anything. He simply waved his arm again and sent another wave of flowers toward him. Confident that he wasn't going to get hurt, Vincent did not even bother to resist this time. But in the next second, he immediately regretted this decision, as one of these sharp flowers sliced a deep wound across his stomach. Due to the intense pain, Vincent couldn't help but grit his teeth as he quickly raised his left hand and put up his protective shield once again to block the other flowers. At the same time, Vincent's heart was filled with doubt. If these flowers were just an illusion, then how was he suddenly injured by one of them? Not wanting to waste too much time with him, Leo Hayes took a step forward and pressed his index finger lightly on Vincent's shield, releasing a tiny light that instantly shattered the shield. This forced Vincent to take a few steps back as he let out a few muffled groans from pain and exhaustion. But just like how he had treated Kevin earlier, Leo did not want to give him any time to regroup. He then punched Vincent's face, sending him flying backward until he crashed into a huge rock. With blood slowly flowing out from his mouth and nose, half of Vincent's face turned extremely red and swollen. Given that he had had the strength of a final stage level 7 expert, how powerful was Leo Hayes to have dealt with him so easily?
You? Who are you exactly?
Vincent asked while using his left hand to lean on the rock behind him for support. You don't need to know who I am. You only need to understand that today will be your last day on this earth, Leo uttered as he slowly approached Vincent.
Do you know who I am? I'm the commissioner of the Herbalist Society. So what if you're some powerful being? If something bad happens to me, the Herbalist Society will never let you get away with it.
Vincent warned as he tried to hide his apprehension. So what? Even if Earl Mathis was here, he wouldn't dare to stop me if I wanted to take your life. Leo's expression remained unchanged as he said this, but his desire to kill him seemed to grow stronger with each word. Vincent Reeves's heart was filled with shock when he heard this. Aside from the fact that he didn't expect this old man to have such a fiery temper, he thought that mentioning the Herbalist Society would scare him off. However, he didn't even feel threatened by Earl Mathis's reputation.
Could he be a very important figure from the upper realm?
Vincent anxiously thought to himself.
What is the relationship between you and Kevin? Are you really willing to make the entire Herbalist Society your enemy because of him?
Vincent bit the bullet and slowly asked. Kevin is my protege, and you injured him badly under my watch. If I don't use your life as compensation, then how can I prove myself as a worthy mentor? Leo finally revealed. Upon hearing this, Vincent's eyes widened in disbelief. After all, he thought that he already knew everything about Kevin's background. Less than a year ago, Kevin was just an ordinary person, but since becoming an expert, he has made rapid progress in terms of both increasing his strength and influence. Apart from having some conflict with the Union, he also had some relationships with the 2 deans of the Healing Arts School. Moreover, it was very likely that he was one of the higher-ups of the Radiance. But he never expected that Kevin would actually have such a powerful mentor behind him. Realizing this, Vincent Reeves understood that his actions today would have dire consequences, especially after drawing the anger of this mighty figure. As such, it seemed a little too late for him to talk his way out of it. Vincent suddenly felt that everything in front of him had gone dark, and he lost consciousness. Looking at Kevin, who was lying helplessly on the ground, Leo shook his head slightly and scolded. Even though you have yet to master your skills, you keep stirring up conflicts with strong enemies wherever you go. You still have a lot to learn, kid. With that, Leo lifted Kevin off the ground and carried him on his back, then casually pulled Vincent's leg as they quickly disappeared into the depths of the forest. At the same time, Lily, Emo Squire, and the others were very busy on their phones. Using the network of connections that they had at their fingertips, a large number of people were sent out to look for Kevin. They heard that Kevin had fought with someone in the Salix Leaf Hotel 2 hours before disappearing without a trace. With reports of a huge commotion on the outskirts of Chicago shortly after, Lily and the others were naturally very worried that something bad might have happened to him. They were not the only ones concerned about this matter, as the various powers in Chicago had also acted quickly upon hearing the news. Knowing how powerful the Williams Company was, no one knew how many people were secretly monitoring the situation. But with Kevin's status still up in the air, they could only suppress their plans for now. Meanwhile, at the Steele's family mansion, just as a member of the Myriads whispered something into Brett Stewart's ear, Dalton Steele had also read a text message on his phone that made him frown. After taking a deep breath, Brett ordered, "Send someone to look for Kevin immediately. Whether he's alive or dead, bring him to me." "Yes, Supreme Commander." This man didn't dare to stay any longer as he immediately turned around and left. Brett then turned to Dalton and exclaimed, "Something bad has happened to Kevin."
"I have also received the news just now. Moreover, aside from Kevin, it seems that the Commissioner of the Herbalist Society has also disappeared. The police found a severed hand at the scene, and the DNA test proved that it belonged to Vincent Reeves."
Dalton narrowed his eyes and replied, "Does this mean that the Herbalist Society is going to attack Kevin?" Brett asked with a solemn expression. Despite hearing this, Dalton didn't answer him, for he was currently deep in thought. Dalton's loyalties to his longtime best friend had wavered after he had come to believe that Kevin no longer esteemed him. A change of heart was long in coming for Dalton, but it had begun. He knew instinctively that Kevin was good and honorable, and that despite the evidence that Dalton had viewed, perhaps wrongly, Kevin would never betray Dalton. Yet he had acted rashly and perhaps unwisely, and Dalton was beginning to realize that he had to make amends for many horrible acts against his friend. At the same time, the Herbalist Society also announced that if anything bad happened to Vincent Reeves, they would wipe out all the powers related to Kevin. This shocking development instantly caused an uproar as it exploded across Chicago. Just as Vincent Reeves was about to deliver the final blow to end Kevin's life, he was stopped by a monstrous pressure as Leo Hayes came out of nowhere to save his protege. Using the Blue Storm technique, Leo was able to trick Vincent with his illusions and then injure him badly. When Vincent warned that the Herbalist Society would seek revenge if something bad happened to him, Leo revealed that he was Kevin's mentor and knocked him out. With Kevin and Vincent both unconscious, Leo then took both of them with him. When news of Kevin's disappearance spread across Chicago, this sparked different reactions from everyone. To make things worse, with Vincent's fate also up in the air, the Herbalist Society threatened to destroy everyone related to Kevin, shaking the entire city to its core. After all, who had never heard of the Herbalist Society? Even in the minds of ordinary people, the Herbalist Society had always been a high and mighty existence. This time, not only did Kevin offend the Herbalist Society, but he had also mysteriously disappeared along with its commissioner. Given this, if anything bad happened to Vincent Reeves, the Williams Company would definitely be destroyed in revenge. Not used to seeing the Williams Company in such a precarious situation, this piece of news made Kevin's enemies suddenly feel overjoyed. They couldn't wait to see the Williams Company's downfall and gain from its losses. In contrast, those who had been supporting the Williams Company felt as if they were currently sitting on pins and needles. In a panic state, many of them wanted to cut off all relations with the Williams Company in order to save themselves. At the same time, in the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford was reading a book in his hand when the door was violently pushed open by Harley Shepard as he anxiously walked in. Seeing this, Wayne raised his eyebrows and asked, "What's wrong?" "I just received news that Vincent Reeves and Kevin fought on the outskirts of Chicago. Now it seems that both of them have disappeared and authorities have found Vincent's chopped off hand. Because of this, the Herbalist Society released a statement declaring that if anything were to happen to Vincent, they would wipe out all of the organizations tied to Kevin. Harley explained.
What?
Wayne instantly stood up from his chair in disbelief, then asked,
Are you sure that your sources are accurate?
Is there still a need to verify this if the entire city is already in an uproar?
Harley retorted, then added,
What should we do now? If the Herbalist Society really wants to take revenge on Kevin, they will definitely attack us as well.
Very few people knew that the Healing Arts School and the Herbalist Society had never gotten along well. The reason was very simple. The Healing Arts School originally intended to educate and nurture the development of talented people to eventually work for one of the other schools within the Great Powers in the future. However, the Herbalist Society had always liked to recruit its top students to work for them instead. In order to reduce tensions, the Herbalist Society had actually offered an olive branch to the Healing Arts School, intending to officially acquire them for its own use. But at that time, Wayne Ford rejected the offer, wanting to maintain his school's status as an independent organization.
Why would they attack us? It's not like we were the ones who took away Vincent Reeves.
Wayne expressed some anger.
Wayne, don't forget that Kevin was once a student of the Healing Arts School. Besides, back when he fought valiantly against the Vanguard forces of the Pinnacle, didn't you think so highly of him that you were willing to defend him against everyone else?
Harley hurriedly reminded him.
Well, is there something that we can do to save this school?
Wayne sighed. When he saw Harley's helpless expression, he immediately understood what to do. If the Herbalist Society really wanted to attack the Healing Arts School due to Kevin's status as a former student, he had to prepare accordingly.
Quick, gather all of the teachers in the school right now.
Wayne's face revealed a look of urgency as he said this. But just as Harley was about to leave, the office door suddenly closed by itself. At the same time, a figure appeared by the window like a ghost. Seeing this person, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard's expression drastically changed almost simultaneously, as they both lowered their heads to acknowledge his presence. Of course, the man who appeared before them was none other than the elusive Night King.
I understand your concerns, but you don't have to worry about the threat posed by the Herbalist Society. Vincent and Kevin are both in my hands, and they will remain with me for the time being,
the Night King revealed slowly, then added,
Given this, the main reason I came to see you this time is because of Kevin. Right now, you have to help him stabilize the situation in Chicago. No matter what happens, do not waver.
Yes, sir,
the two answered without any hesitation.
After settling matters in Chicago, come to this place and find me,
the Night King instructed. He then left a piece of paper on the table before disappearing in a flash. Looking at the address written on the paper, Harley Shepard and Wayne Ford both smiled.
You should know what to do now,
Wayne uttered as he took the note and rubbed it between his fingers lightly before dropping it into a lit candle to burn it to ashes.
Don't worry, I will make arrangements and deal with it immediately.
Harley nodded and quickly left the office. Half an hour later, another piece of news spread across Chicago. The Healing Arts School had expressed its full support for the Williams Company. As such, anyone who dared to do anything against them would be deemed an enemy of the school. This was something that no one had expected. How could the dignified Healing Arts School make such a bold statement? However, some people began to realize that this presented a new dilemma for them. They were afraid that this was no longer just a personal grudge, and this matter would eventually require everyone else to choose a side between the Herbalist Society and the Williams Company. In that case, this conflict might once again overturn the current situation in Chicago. As for the actual person involved, Kevin had absolutely no idea about what was happening in Chicago. At this moment, he was lying in bed as he slowly opened his eyes. Before he could see his surroundings clearly, He smelled a strong medicinal scent in the room, but when he tried to move his body slightly, he immediately felt sharp pains from head to toe. As such, he could only grimace helplessly while lying still. Right now, Kevin's condition looked miserable. His entire body was covered with bandages, which made him look like a mummy, and some parts were still soaked in blood. "It's good that you know it hurts. Hopefully this will teach you not to provoke someone stronger than you again in the future," Leo lectured while fiddling with some medicinal herbs and added, "Fortunately, I was able to arrive just in time to stop Vincent Reeves. Otherwise, who knows what he would have done to you?" "Thank you for saving my life," Kevin uttered sincerely. At the same time, he couldn't help but feel a warmth in his heart, knowing that although his two mentors were usually quite elusive, they would always stand up for him whenever he encountered danger. "Don't just thank me with your words, kid. In the future, learning your lesson and causing less trouble for me will be the best form of gratitude," Leo chided as he placed a small cup of medicine on Kevin's bedside table and slowly untied the bandages on his body. Although Leo did this as gently as possible, it still hurt so much that Kevin visibly winced in pain. "You did this to yourself, so no matter how painful it is, you must bear with it," Leo reminded him. Upon hearing this, Kevin did not dare to argue with him. He then took a deep breath and gritted his teeth to endure the pain. Seeing him like this, the corner of Leo's haze mouth curved slightly as he casually remarked, "I don't want to scare you or anything, but the real pain has yet to come." These words made Kevin anxiously throw his gaze back to the cup of medicine on the bedside table. However, knowing that this was for his own good, he had no choice but to bear with it. In the beginning, when the medicine was applied to his body, Kevin only felt a wave of coldness, and his wounds didn't sting too much. But after Kevin consumed a pill that Leo gave him, he instantly felt a burning sensation all over his body, causing him to let out miserable screams of pain. Already expecting this, Leo patiently applied more medicine to Kevin's wounds while using his spiritual energy to restrain Kevin's movements. About half an hour later, Kevin's face was extremely pale, and his forehead was covered with sweat. He looked like he was about to faint from the intense pain that he had just endured. "All right, you can rest now. I will come back to apply more medicine again later tonight," Leo said lightly. "Wait, it's still not over?" Kevin asked faintly in fear. "Stop complaining. You may not realize it, but given the injuries that you sustained, Vincent Reeves obviously wanted to kill you earlier today. Although you are still alive, nearly half of the bones in your body have been broken. So if you don't recover well, your development will be stunted and your power base won't advance any further," Leo warned with a serious face, then added, "The Night King went out to find some herbs for you. In the meantime, you should get some rest until I come back." Lying on the bed and looking at the ceiling, Kevin could not help but recall his battle with Vincent Reeves. At the time, he clearly realized how wide the difference in strength was between them. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was beaten up so badly that he did not have the ability to fight back and defend himself. Still, although he was seriously injured, Vincent didn't succeed in killing him, and even lost his right hand because of him. So, despite being the underdog during their battle, Kevin didn't feel that he had suffered such a devastating loss in the end. In fact, not only did this setback not affect his confidence, but it actually increased Kevin's desire to do whatever it would take for him to become even stronger in the future. Very soon, it was already nighttime. As Leo Hayes began to reapply some medicine to his wounds, Kevin once again felt indescribable pain and gritted his teeth to try to bear with it. Fortunately, the Night King rushed back in the middle of the night and gave him a pill that relieved some of the pain, making Kevin feel a little better, at least for the time being. But Vincent Reeves still lurked and was intent on getting revenge on his eternal enemy, Kevin Williams.